our speaker tonight. Ken Schmitt is from the Chippewa County area. He is a neighbor of sand mines and has become quite an activist, gathering information, data, learning about the ins and outs of sand mining as a result of his own personal experiences. And I'm just thrilled that he is willing to share those experiences, thoughts, and ideas with us today. Ken Schmitt.
Well, I gotta say Dana's much more, how should I phrase this? Was much more friendlier to the governor than I probably would have been under similar circumstances. You gotta understand what the framework behind that is also. Dana refers to me as a Reformed Republican. I've always viewed myself as independent, but definitely fell off on the right side of the bus. Not mean right is right or wrong, but right versus left. Not sure where I'm at anymore with the current situation in Madison, so Dana, congratulations on that ability. I guess tonight I'm hoping there's going to be a lot of questions. Beverly said there would be. I didn't prepare too much. I've got a few pictures I'll show you. I did put together one page here to speak about. I started out trying to make a PowerPoint last night, and my computer skills aren't good enough for that. I couldn't make things go where I wanted, so I ditched that in about 15 minutes and went back to the old standby here, paper. I didn't know where to go with this group. I didn't know who was going to be here and what your knowledge level is. I thought I would give you a quick synopsis on some of the planned expansion that we've heard about within the last month or two now, primarily. Chippewa County at the current time has 5 operating mines of consequence. There's one that they took 2 train loads of sand out of, and nothing has happened since. That was back in about 2009, 2010. And there's also another 5 that are permitted. If everything goes that land conservation feels the will, in the next year or so, there will be an additional 5 operating mines in Chippewa County. Those 5 that are operating, there's probably about 3 of them right now that do not have permits yet. There's some small ones that are permitted and have been sitting for a year or two. I don't know what will happen with those. And when I say in Chippewa County, 10 mines doesn't sound like so much probably, except for the fact it's all within about 3 or 4 townships. It's all in the northwest corner. And that's politically an interesting situation when you get to the bodies of the county board, because now you've only got 1 or maybe 2 board members that have sand mines in their district. The rest of them, it's not my backyard. My constituents aren't concerned, so you see a different dynamics play out on the board versus in a county where you have the whole county at risk, potentially, depending on the area of the state you're in. Right now, there's a proposal for a 1,300-acre mine in the southwest corner of Howard. That would be the furthest south in Chippewa County, and that's by Northern Frac Sand. And Red Flint is getting involved in that. I don't know if it's in a management role or if it's an ownership role also. That hasn't been spelled out yet. Preferred Sands has plans to build a dry plant on the north end of Bloomer, which some of you may have heard about. It's going to have a resin plant with it. It's just north of the intersection of 64 and Double S, east of 53 there. They have their current mine that's operating, and they have a new one permitted, which you're also working on the town of Auburn. That'll be 952 acres. And when I'm giving you these mines, it's more to give you an idea how big. There's no test involved, and it's not inclusive of all the mines. This is I picked the highlights There's another mine next to the preferred one in Auburn, so the town hall up there will be surrounded on basically 3 sides with sand mines. And that one's by Donnie Union Transporter, DRT. It's in the neighborhood of 245 acres. That one is still, I believe they've got an application in, but it's not permitted yet. Then Steve Rooney and Dan Steele have a proposal in the town of Bloomer. That'll be the town of Bloomer's first mine. There's another processing plant also in Bloomer north of the preferred site, which will be between Double S and 53. It's behind the 2-acre supper club if you're familiar with it. And that one's by Whitehaven Sand. And there's some discrepancy. A woman who was going to the meetings told me that the lawyer for the sand company said it was tied to Whitehaven Coal. Then at the next meeting he denied it, so maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But that's kind of common when you see sand companies move in, is there's usually 2 or 3 versions of the truth and they're not compatible. Superior Silica has a mine now at 64 and Double D in Chippewa County, and if you go west at 64, that's one that is very apparent. You can see a lot there. And they have a dry plant on the north edge of New Auburn, which just is into Barron County. They have now started so that, including that dry plant, they also have two more in Barron County, one of which they've just started running, is just up and finished. And the one that they opened has a capacity of 2.5 million tons per year. To put that into scale for you a little bit, the EOG plant Chippewa Falls, when it was built, was the biggest plant in the country that we're aware of. And we've seen confirmation of this statement a few different places, some inside industry, some outside. This one in the Superior Silica one is very close to that size. The preferred plant that I just mentioned to you is going to be bigger than Chippewa Falls one, and there's one, and I'll get down here a little further and I'll come back to that statement again, because the preferred one before it's built right now is the biggest one planned, but it's already going to be, it's going to lose its position here with another one coming. We're running too close. Eyes are getting old. Chieftain Sand, which is the one when you go north of New Auburn on 53, you see the circular train track around it. That's Chieftain. They're in the process of developing 9 more mining areas in the towns of Sioux Creek and Dover. And they're going to increase their dryer capacity from 150 tons per hour to 400 tons per hour. And that will be that I think will be the biggest plant in the country at that time. The one just before you get there with the blue silos, there's 2 of them right side by side, is Great Northern. That's been bought out, and it's now called Northern White Sand. And they're also doubling their dry plant. And that plant and EOG are the 2 that I know of that wash where the sand is dried. All the rest of them wash in the mine. Well, Great Northern, or now Northern White Sand, is going to move their wash plant out into the mine, and that mine also. Then you go a little further north, in the town of Sumner, and Source Energies has a 200-acre mine site that they established in 2011, and will grow. And most of this information now is coming out of the Rice Lake Chronotype, a story they had back on the 23rd of December. And we're likely to grow to about 1,000 acres. And you read in a different spot, they're in the process of 10 property approval for mining on 10 properties. To mine 40 to 45 acres this year, yielding 5 million tons of raw material and 2.7 million tons of dried frac sand. And then in another story, they have nearly 1,500 acres lined up, mainly east of its existing mine along Highway 8 in the town of Sumner. And they've got 9, in this story it also said 9 privately owned parcels ranging in size from 40 to 157 acres each. Now as you go north on 53, there's 2 sites under construction. One of them is Northern Rail and Transload. And originally when that came in, it was supposed to be a propane hub to bring propane in, since the propane line into Minnesota has been shut down and reversed to take more natural gas up into the tar sands. Well, there's also one of these propane hubs been put in down to Hickston to help alleviate the strain from the propane crisis last winter. And somebody in Chippewa County government looked at me and said, "No, it ain't. That's for sand." Well, they also talk about taking sand out. Well, I says, well, it doesn't pass the smell test. The part that really bothers is they've got a rail that's overcrowded already. Propane cars and sand cars aren't compatible. I mean, you can't haul the others. So you've got 2 sets of trains now. The other problem with that rail, it's in very poor condition. They've had 3 derailments, I believe it is, since the first of the year between Chippewa Falls and New Auburn. Now, can anybody say West Virginia? No propane? So it's probably just for sand. And there's another site up there, Global Prop and Supply, plans to build a dry plant along Double S also, and they've started construction. And that'll make it the 4th sand plant within about a 4-mile stretch there. And they're operating the mines on Sioux Creek as Sioux Creek Silica. And they've got more than 1,000 acres secured for sand mining. And the mines I told you about in Chippewa County, some of the ones that are operating right now, they've all got, many of the landowners involved have more land that they can expand, but they weren't permitted originally at that size. So when you, like the Chippewa Sands, for instance, is permitted around 220, 240 acres, something like that. But they control, the two landowners involved control over 800 acres. And that's expansion you're gonna see coming along, and some of those mines will also expand. So, now, if anybody's got any questions when I'm talking here, butt in, please. Raise your hand, whatever. And we've
I
got
have a
some-
question.
Yep.
So how profitable is this for, you know,
Very.
somebody's got the land, obviously, they're making money, not
Yep.
just the sand mining companies. There's a win-win deal here for some people,
Right.
right? Okay.
I'll answer that two different ways.
All right.
The landowners typically, the land that's being mined is typically leased, it's not bought by the mining companies. And they'll buy the land where they set their dry plant on generally, but the rest they'll lease. And I'm not quite sure what the real reason for that is. There's two schools of thought. The more pessimistic view is that the reason they lease it is because the liability stays with the land after the company's gone. The landowner's left with any liability that may arise. The other possibility is, and there's a provision in state law that foreign companies can only own 640 acres of farmland in Wisconsin, which the last budget Walker tried to take out. I don't know if that's in there this time again or not, but so now if you call this farmland, that could be an issue because some of these companies have foreign ownership. I don't really know on that score, but the landowners typically aren't. There's some that get a small fee per year, sometimes a few $1,000s, sometimes 15 or 20. A lot of these are strictly on the amount of sand that is removed per year. It's a tonnage fee, and it runs anywhere between 70 cents to $1.50 is kind of a normal range from what I've heard. There may be some that are a little more than that, and that's usually on a raw basis. For the companies, I can give you a better number there. UOG and Upstream in the January 2012 issue, Upstream projected that they were going to save $400 million with their sand operations. Now, at that time, their sand operations consisted of the plant in Chippewa and the two mines in Chippewa County that were operating. They have one more mine up in Barron County. I've heard they were going to sell it, and I don't know if they did or not, but that wasn't operating, so that wasn't in the equation for 2012. Now, later in the year, they did downgrade this to $300 million. That sand plant in Chippewa Falls cost them somewhere, publicly they've said 60, 70 million, but I've heard from pretty reliable sources that it's over 100 million. And then they've got other associated fees with the mines and stuff, but it cost $2 million to open the mine in Howard. Well, okay, so you've got over 100 million for the plant, you've got $2 million to open the mine and some permitting fees and engineering costs. But when you stack that against a $300 million savings for the year because they're using their own sand versus buying it, you can, I mean, they paid for the operations 1 year. So that pretty much indicates the level of profit that there's there.
And there may be a write-off or something, you know, who knows, there may be some business loss in there. I'm just trying to see what we're up against here, that's pretty clear.
There's a lot of money involved, yes.
And then it's not, you know, just the corporations, it's are these farmers who are, you know, I've read this, I've been keeping up on it. Are these farmers who are, and then they go to Florida, or do they, what happens to these people who sell the land? Do most of them just take off and go to Florida or something?
Most of them still live where they lived yet.
Oh.
Because if you sell your sand and then you move away, that really puts a target on your back with the neighbors.
Okay.
But I can't see that some haven't moved away or haven't sold the land to somebody else, a third party who's leasing it either. The interesting thing in the southwest corner of Howard, when this proposal first came forward about almost a little over a year ago, there's a couple houses went up for sale immediately. And somebody just told me the other day, and I sit on Chippewa Valley Electric Board too also now, at least until the next election for sure. And one of the other board members, and for the electric company this is a good deal because we've got sales and big sales, and it helps. So I don't want to say the board is pro-sand, but they aren't anti-sand. And that's fine. Under that hat, I can see we're making money. It is what it is. It's there. There's no reason not to sell electricity to them just because we have to, basically. So, but he says there's 33 houses for sale in the village of New Auburn. That's a town with, I don't know, 900, maybe 1,100 people, somewhere in that range. that's a lot of houses for sale in a small village. And I don't know how they're selling. I know a realtor up there and I was gonna talk to him, but I haven't got that far yet, just to see how the behind the scenes, the realty view of the situation is what I was interested in. Yes,
You talk about a dry mine. What is the dry mine?
the dry plant,
The dry plant? Is that where they dry the
sand,
dry?
yes. The process is they have to remove the overburden of the mine, and then they mine their material, their target material, and they wash it, and your yield is anywhere from 50 to 70% usually, kind of in that range is what we've understood. And the waste material goes back for reclamation, and most of the mines, and they'll stockpile the washed sand, and then they'll haul that sand by truck usually to their dry plant, which is usually located in the railroad. For the dry plant, they need a lot of electricity, they need gas, they need rail. For just about all of them got on rail. There's one Superior Silica plant up in Barron County that the business model is to truck the sand, and they wanted to go through Taylor's Falls into Minnesota to get on the Burlington Northern Railroad. But the town up there got up in arms, so basically they shot that down in Minnesota. I guess something I just read, that Minnesota DOT is still looking at putting another bridge in someplace to bring sand into Minnesota to get to that railroad. But right now, Superior Silica has basically figured out 2 or 3 different ways they can go with the sand to truck it, to get it to rail depots that they already own to ship it out.
What does that plant do with the, I don't know, hundreds of millions of gallons of water that's picked up the minerals that has been washed off of the sand, that doesn't evaporate in the drying process?
Most of the water and the minerals will stay at the wet site. The industry is, their process has changed and improved. They first started out with washing, they got wash pens, and there was some pictures here of that. And they're still washing yet, but now they've went to belt presses, now they're going to plate presses. And what they get is a much drier product, so there's less water going with the sand to the dry plants. And at the dry plants, there's probably some that'll weep out now coming off the belt or plate presses, but probably isn't, just probably very little. And that simply goes up in the air as steam because they've got a dryer with natural gas fired that goes up through your stacks.
But what happens to the water that doesn't go up the stack?
At the mine site from washing, they'll have wash ponds, and they'll circulate it back through, and they use flocculants to take the sediment out, and they'll reuse the water, but there's always loss, evaporation. And
What's flocculants? What is that actually?
flocculants, it's polyacrylamide is the one that's commonly used, and they've got others too. There's one's called polydatcap, but I don't know a lot about the polydatcap, and that's a word about this long, so don't ask me what it stands for. The polyacrylamide is it's used all over the world for a lot of different things. It's used in landscaping, and it's used in water treatment plants, sewage treatment plants, for potable water, and there's different grades of it. The concern with polyacrylamide is it's a polymer made of a bunch of monomers, and the monomer of concern is acrylamide, which is a neurotoxic carcinogenic compound, or monomer I should say. I suppose it's not a compound, it's monomer. And there's always some free acrylamide in polyacrylamide when it's made. It depends on how good a quality of product you buy, how much is free in there. The article I read said that the cooking process determines how much free acrylamide is left. And I don't know if it's a cooking process, it's just in a process, or if it's actually a heat process that the story didn't go into. And that's a concern. Acrylamide has about a 14-day half-life, and it breaks down into basically inert substances. So, and the polyacrylamide also breaks down into its, there's 2 schools of thought out here when polyacrylamide breaks down. One set of studies says that it's not a problem, it's all inert substances. The other one says it breaks down into its original monomers. And after, from what I wonder is, the 2 studies, I think one maybe went a little further and waited longer for the acrylamide to break down to the inert substances, where the first study didn't maybe. So the question becomes is, how fast does it break down? In this usage where you've got a lot of it being used and you've got this volume of waste material being buried in a mine, how does that affect the process of breaking down time-wise? And acrylamide has an affinity for water. So okay, now you put it in a deep hole, potentially close to groundwater, is there an issue here or not? DNR has not been concerned about this from day one, really. Chippewa County, at the Town of Howard meetings, we raised that question for the public hearing on the permit about acrylamide. And Chippewa County didn't know what to do with it really, and didn't do too much with it. Then when it came to the town and we got our agreement, our negotiator got a provision in the EOG when they signed the mining agreement that they would test for acrylamide in the waste coming back. To date, none's been found. In later permits, Dan Masterpork, land conservationist, did get a provision in there. They were requiring industrial pond liners in the mines in order to, in the wash ponds to hold the water. And Preferred Sands came to Dan and said, our engineers are telling us this is a waste of money, we don't need to do it. Dan says, well, your engineers, have your engineers send their information to my engineers and we'll look at it and we'll see where we go from there. And Chippewa County has 2 engineers on staff in land conservation. There's some counties that have none, so we're kind of fortunate that way. And they kind of said, well, yeah, from what the information they sent, it's right. And so Dan sat down with Preferred and then later Superior. He did it with 2 mines and said, you guys can put a 1-foot compacted clay liner in your ponds, but in exchange for letting you off the hook in industrial pond liners in them, you put a monitoring well directly down gradient of the ponds, and if you find acrylamide in any of those samples, you can go back and put industrial pond liners in. To date, nothing has been found. They've changed testing protocols a little bit over the years, but the caveat here is, and Dan will tell you this, they're not doing the sampling, the companies are doing the sampling. And then my question is, on something like this where it breaks down in 14 days, 14-day half-life, rather, how fast you gotta get the sample pulled into the lab and tested in order to find what you're looking for. But if it's breaking down that fast underground, we may not have a problem, or we might, who knows?
So are those tests performed by company employees or by outside labs? My daughter worked for a gold mining company, and for their reserves, the gold mining company had to have the mineral, the raw material, the ore, analyzed by outside and certified by an outside lab. Is it these guys, Joe is a good buddy and he works for the company that does the test, or is it a certified lab somewhere?
I believe it would be a certified lab. They had a hard time, I know, with the town of Howard, even finding a lab that had the capability to test it. But the crux of the matter might be is who's pulling the samples, and I can't speak to that. I believe it's the companies pulling the samples, although they may hire an engineering firm to do it. EOG has had SEH hired to do a lot of their engineering, and I think they might have changed engineering companies on that end now, but they had Ayers hired independently to do their pre-blast surveys and their water tests in order to try to give it a appearance of acceptability, for lack of a better phrase.
I have a question. Master Cole was at our last Sierra Club meeting, and he was talking about the rehabilitation of, restoring. Reclamation is the word I want. Reclamation. And he did a really thorough presentation. It was really interesting and very, very technical. My question is, he said their staff there in the conservation department is just overwhelmed with the amount of work. But aren't there separate companies that will do this reclamation and come in and be paid by the mining company to restore the property?
I don't know if any exist right now. That's a possibility they'll develop. There's definitely subcontractors that'll do different portions of it, I would imagine. But I don't know that there's, basically the only company I know of that's done any real reclamation would be Badger Mining out of Taylor. And that mine's been there since the mid-70s. It's one of the 5 or 6 we had up until probably 8-9 years ago in the state. I know when I toured down in 2009, the vice president gave us a tour, said that they were trying to start some trees and stuff, but they had it had problems. It wasn't the first time success.
Well, it looks very technical because they try to get the gradation, you know, of the original piece of land restored because they need the water runoff.
Trying to
you
keep the
know.
water flow the same, yes.
Right, and so, looks to me like it's a very expensive process.
It is, and we've raised questions, I certainly have for a long time, what reclamation looked like and what it was gonna entail. And, cause that was one of our concerns, when you've got this many thousands of acres tore up,
Mhm.
what are we gonna be left with? Is it gonna be productive, or is it gonna be simply an armpit area of the state when you get done with it? For lack of a better phrase, you understand what I'm saying anyway. And I think now that there's certain, I know land conservation at first didn't pay a lot of attention to the reclamation end of it because they were more concerned on the front end and they were so overwhelmed. And now I think they're starting to see some of the true questions and challenges that are gonna be there down the road. And one of those questions that I've been raising for a long time is, okay, you've got leased land and you reclaim this to a wildlife use, what's gonna prevent that landowner, after the reclamation bond is released, from going in there and plowing it up and trying to plant corn or beans in there and using all kinds of fertilizers and chemicals to control his problems and try and raise a crop on ground that's not suitable? The answer is there isn't a whole lot to prevent him from doing that.
Well, he said their office is overwhelmed. He said they aren't doing some of the work that they should be doing and had been doing in their past because they're just overwhelmed with the issue of reclamation.
Dan has gained a half-time position for the summer, limited term employee for the summer, and that's a college intern. That's the first staff addition that office has had probably, and there's been some reorganization stuff, but they have not gained any hours of help. Probably before the mining started,
but he
actually they
did-
lost help.
But he didn't, it sounds like they're getting paid from the company.
Yep.
Maybe that's just covering the cost of now taking it off the county tax assessment. I mean, it's just coming in from the mining companies. Is that the issue there? I mean, they're obviously, you don't go out and do that for nothing.
The conservation committee, and I was on that committee from 2010 to 2012, but shortly before I got on there, that committee put a policy in place where the mine operations pay for their services they get from the county.
Okay.
I can't speak to where the money came from before that to fund these positions that were already there. I think some of it was levy money, I don't know that it all was. So the companies are paying their way, and
I would suspect they're billing their hours of work on that project.
yes, they're keeping track of that.
Yeah.
They have to, and that's how those fees get set, and they get adjusted once in a while. I think we did it once when I was on the committee, and it's looked at how many hours it takes for this plan, and if they're getting enough money out of the permit fees in order to cover that. Because NR 135 allows that. That's a state reclamation law. It's a state statute that the counties or municipalities, government municipalities, administer. And it's got sideboards on it. I don't know how many of you are aware of it. That was passed probably roughly 35 years ago when environmentalists and industry sat down, and instead of continually fighting each other in court, they decided to sit down and write some sort of law everybody could live with, back when everybody talked to each other in Madison a little bit yet. And they came up with this law, and it's not perfect. It's got sideboards. You can only go so strict, and you can be about so lenient, but no more lenient to this. And the idea was to get something in place that kind of worked. And one of those parts of that law is these companies have to have a bond in place to cover reclamation. If they just walk away or they go bankrupt, even though they want to reclaim it, they can't. So that there's money there that the taxpayers aren't left footing the bill, because under that law, if somebody sues the governing municipality, they have to cough up the money in order to reclaim those sites. And like the town of Hartside was 135 acres, it was just short of $2 million to open that up. Well, if it costs $2 million to open it up, it's gonna cost $2 million to put it back plus inflation.
more
Yeah.
than that.
But there's counties that aren't getting enough money either. I don't know what Barron County's doing now. Kind of about 5 years ago, they were collecting $1,600 or $1,700 an acre as a bond. Well, they upped it to $3,000-4,000 and thought they were doing something.
Mhm.
At that time, Dan and Land Conservation Department were at 10,000 acre in Chippewa County. And I kept pressing them. I says, "Are you sure this is enough?" Yeah, it's enough. Well, one day I'm walking through the office, one of the engineers says to me, "Hey, Ken, you're right. I love to be told I'm right, but what about?" He says, "We're seeing in some of these mines where they're moving more overburden than $10,000 an acre isn't gonna cut it."
No.
So Chippewa County's went to a per ton fee. And I actually kind of pushed him in the public comment period of the last county board meeting. He says, "This is great, but you know, on the reclamation end, just because you seed this once doesn't make it a success. There needs to be extra money here in case this doesn't work. If you get a washout, or if your seedings fail because it's too dry or too wet,
Mhm.
then you gotta have enough money here that you can do it right if you have to do some of these reclamation stuff."
Well, it sounds like, from Masterful's presentation, that a lot of this is experimental.
Very
With
experimental.
the crops that they're trying to grow, and, so there's going to be a lot of failures, I suspect.
There'll be less and less stellar results, yes.
Right.
So. Okay, any other questions, or? Okay. Now, let's see. Where's my tech man here? Would you- And these pictures are out of date. They're from June of 2012. And at that time, most of these mines were no more than 2 years old, a year to 2 years probably. And I went along as a guide on an airplane with picture taking. And a woman handed me a camera and said, "Here, these are your pictures." So. This is the S&S mine out in town of Howard.
You shut the lights off so they can see better. That's sure.
And there's a bank coming up this way to the west, and that's in the bottom of the hole. Now they're mining up on top over here. We'll hit the next picture, I guess. I'm gonna go through these kind of fast. If you get questions, holler them out as we're going here. This is another shot of the same picture. And you can see the strata's in sandstone here, and they have to blast in order to get that sandstone loose. Okay.
Ken, can I ask a real
Yep.
quick? I mean, by the way, folks, Ken gave Beverly and I about a 2 or 3 hour tour one morning, and it's worth going. You won't believe what you see when you go on it. But I did want to ask you, Ken, the blasting that they do. I mean, your house is pretty close to some of this stuff. Can you feel that or hear it?
Yes, you can feel it. Our house is a kitty corner across the 40, and then probably we're 300 feet up on our lot where our house is. So it's probably from their blasting, it's under a half mile, it's probably about 3/8 of a mile. And the first time they blasted, I was just sitting down to dinner, and I had flipped the news on. I usually sit with my back to the TV, and I thought, well, I should sit on the other side of the table so I can watch it. I set my hot beef, and I can show you his pan was. You have to sit on the table, was warming up leftovers. And I go around the other side of the table, and I sit down in the chair, and put my sandwich together, and the pan was too far across. I had to raise up in my chair, just, the butt still touched the chair, yet just barely. At the moment I got up to just raise my butt out of the chair in order to reach that pan is when the tremor hit. And the chair went like this under my butt. That's kind of a freaky feeling. But it'll rattle windows and stuff in our house. To me, it's not that big a deal one way or the other, the blasting. Lori's cousin lives right across from the mine, and he'll have full pint jars of syrup on the kitchen cupboard, and they'll rattle together when they blast on the cupboard. And I was standing in his house one day against the wall like this, and it was against the divide in the patio door, and you'd have swore that door moved a half inch under your shoulder. I'm sure it did. It's probably an eighth inch, maybe a quarter, but it moved substantially. I guess there was a beauty the other day, he said the rocks flew about 200 feet in the air when they blew, so, but you can feel it, neighbors know it. We've had one complaint to damage in the town of Howard. I don't know if you can attribute it all to the mine or not. In the end, basically nothing's gonna happen for him, for that landowner, so. This is a Chippewa sand site. This is, I believe it's just north of Double A, if I got my road, or A, County A. And these are the wash ponds I was telling you about. Here would be where your dirtiest water comes back. Here it flows into this one. And the flocculants are applied in here someplace, and you can see it settles out. What the flocculants do is they use an electrical charge so it congeals and it becomes a big enough particle that it'll settle out. And here's their reserve pond where they pump water out to wash again. This would be a wash sand pile. This is their wash plant right there.
So what do they do in sub-zero weather like this? I mean, how do you wash sand when your ponds are frozen?
Typically, they've been shutting down in the winter with these wash plants in the mines, and that's where the EOG model was superior. You had all the sand, including the waste, into Chippewa, but it was all heated and they could wash year round, or they
Okay.
can. Now, this article that I took some of this out of the Rice Lake Chronotype. Actually, it was one from yesterday's paper. They're talking about that, and a couple companies up there. One has put aluminum skin around their wash plant, 2 shells 2 inches thick with fiberglass in between, and they're heating it. And another one, Superior Silica, just put a 2x4 framework up basically in plastic over the top. And the engineer, actually, she was in the town of Howardman with Cooper Engineering out of Rice Lake when they first proposed the mine in Howard. And she's now works for Superior Silica, and she says it takes quite a bit of gas, but it works. So basically, they're continuing to wash up there. They lose productivity, but if they got a not big enough stockpile going in the fall, along with what they wash, and they can make it all the way through the year is what they're working on. So, but they're working towards a longer season all the time by whatever means possible. And those are the same wash ponds again. I was going to delete a couple of these, but I didn't, so you go right ahead. This is the preferred mine site in Cooks Valley. This is the Sam Just Dairy Farm. He's the landowner. And here's their wash plant here with their ponds. And this is the wash sand pile. You can see the basic size of it here. The height is taller than the barn, but not quite as high as tall as the tile usually. And the wash sand, everybody thinks it's washed and it's safe and it's clean. It's not. NIOSH did a study at the Frac pads, and that's all washed sand. And there's 2 different standards they used for the readings they got. One was, I think one was a Michelin standard, maybe one was some sort of OSHA standard. It doesn't really matter. But by one standard, 10% of the samples, the workers were not safe with half-face respirators, and by the other standard, it was between 30 and 40% were not safe with half-face respirators with the wash sand that was being moved into the fracking machinery. So it's washed, the clays are out, but you still got fine particulate there that's dangerous. The town of Howard ordinance, any wash sand, I believe the wash sand piles for sure have to be enclosed now with our ordinance. It was amended about a year ago. I'm not sure what we allow for raw sand piles. This is the same mine you just saw, the barn sitting over here, and this is this hillside. If you go by today, this is all dug out to here, and you won't see basically no green on this whole hillside here. They're just eating back into that hill. This is that, and I told you about the Chippewa sand mine, that's on the other side over here, and they're going this way along this bluff, and this mine is going this way on the other side. So that's how close they are in the scale of it. Okay. This is a Superior Silica double D N64 mine that you see when you go west of 53 and 64. And keep in mind this picture is from June of 2012, so this is way out of date. This at this time I think was the 2nd year operations for this mine, if I'm not mistaken. You can see down in here, there's a little backhoe and a truck for scale. There's a couple more trucks over there. At this time, this mine was permitted at around 240 acres, and they basically doubled it about a year and a half ago probably, the permit. Okay. Here's another shot, same, basically almost the same shot, just a little bit bigger. You can see the machinery a little better. Put that one back up a minute. You'll see in here these darker colors. There's 4 formations that they're basically our target materials in Wisconsin, and Minnesota. One is, top would be St. Peter, which we don't have around here. The next one down is Jordan, and then below the Jordan you got Tunnel City, Wanawak. I got to back up. I'm screwing up my presentation here. There's four formations thereafter. There's the St. Peter's, Jordan, Wanawak, and Mount Simon. Now these aren't all in order. The Jordan would be up in here probably. There's very little bit in Chippewa County. And then you come in here and this is your Tunnel City formation, which up till the last year and a half has been thought to be basically all junk, too many contaminants. But there's one little narrow band in here a couple feet thick that EOG's been taking out and mining in their mines, and I believe they're buying some of that sand from these other companies. And then you've got the Wanawak, which is the major target strata in Chippewa County. And that's what they're mining in here. And when you go below this, then you hit the Eau Claire formation, which is your retarding layer here where your water aquifer sits, basically. And then below that's Mount Simon. Now, from west to east, let's see, I think that's west over there, isn't it? These come from the Mississippi and they slant up out of the, basically up on the angle from the Mississippi to the eastern part of the state. And so, right next to the Mississippi, you'll find St. Peter, but as it slopes out, it disappears. And then you get Jordan, probably at the west edge of Dunn County. And then when you get into Chippewa County here, we've got mainly Wanawak. When you get over to the Stanley area, into the Clark County, then it's the Mount Simon, they're mining over there more. So, a little geology lesson from somebody who didn't like geology ever in school. This is the same mine yet, different. The shot you saw before was over here, and this is further out towards Double D here. Okay. That gives you this idea of the hill they're mining. Another shot, same mine. Okay. And this is their wash plant at the time. They've since enclosed a lot of it, and they've added some more conveyors. There's a bigger stockpile out here most of the time now. The waste material goes out this side now, and they've got a bin there where they catch it, and they run mine trucks underneath to haul it back. The sand comes in from the back of the mine, they pump it through this black pipe right here in a slurry form. The raw sand. This is the EOG processing plant at Chippewa. Sand comes in here on truck, and this is their dump building. Now they've got the 2 domes where the raw sand is stacked in with the fabric covers. It goes into, let's see here, get this. They wash it back in this part of this plant. It comes up here, and this is where the washed sand is stored. It's allowed to, some of the water is allowed to seep out. It comes back in here, and the dryers are up here underneath these 2 stacks. And then the dried sand goes out in these silos where it's loaded onto the train cars, and there's different grades of sand in the different silos, and they can load whatever they want. Now you'll notice this was taken on the morning after. We had a 3/4 inch of rain where I live. I'm not sure how much rain they had here, but you see this is the black roof, and you see the tan dust and dirt all the way around these 2 stacks here. That is exhaust from the dryers. The dryer exhaust goes up the stacks along with the combustion products, byproducts. And when this plant was first being permitted, those stacks were designed to be, I believe it was 53 or 56, 59 feet. I get my 3/6 and 9s mixed up, so tall. And the plant didn't model as safe for surrounding citizens at that height, so they raised those stacks to, I believe it was 109 feet. so it would model safe for surrounding citizens, meaning that there's particulate coming out, and as you get higher, it spreads it out. Solution to pollution is dilution. Okay, that's dandy, isn't it? So everybody's safe now, right? Except for now, this is the same line of reasoning that's been used with the processing plants up in New Auburn. Now you've got 4 plants in a row right now, with another 4 additional, 5 coming, and they're all permitted on the basis of the same ambient information. So you're adding cumulative impacts, which are not considered in the permitting process. That's one of the things I've been harping on for quite a few years now. Not that it's done a whole lot of good, but we have a scoping process coming up for this strategic analysis, and that will be one of my comments. We want to see DNR address that issue to find out what they are doing. It's my belief that there's situations where you've got multiple plants. That one mine I showed you where the dairy barn is here, the Jess one, there's 2 houses on the next 40 over. It's part of a Century Farm, and I think those people are getting too much ambient exposure also for safety's sake. Okay, I think there's one more picture that's out of order yet. This is the same plant, different angle. So. And this is the Danny Sherman mine in Cooks Valley, and this has changed a lot. There'll be a picture coming, and it'll show a bank with it's a big pile of overburden and also waste material, and that would be laying right in here. The mine is down in here. This site here is 220 acres permitted right now, and they're mining the west half of it, so, and there's between 60 and 90 feet of overburden in some places where they move. They stack that on the east half of the property, and as the plan goes, when they get the west half mined out, they move all the overburden off the east side from this half, plus the overburden that's on the east side to the west side to mine the east half of it. And then when they're done, they're gonna have basically it's gonna be a plateau with a little bit of a basin shape so that the runoff goes to the center and then infiltrates the hill eventually is the plan. So, okay, now we got some other pictures coming up here. And this one, I don't know how well you can see it. This is a year ago, it's not quite a year ago, this is the 3rd week of March last year. We had a snow event, it was 2 or 3 inches at night, and it was on a Tuesday, I believe it was a Tuesday night into a Wednesday morning. Wednesday I go to my wife's cousin's place, Jeff, go to his place to help him do something, I can't remember what it was, and he'd been up on the hill feeding his cows, and he says, you see how dirty that snow is? It must come from the mine, and usually I think I got a pretty good poker face, and I said, well, I know Jeff, but yeah, okay, he's usually a pretty straight shooter, but, you know, come on, this, I can't be, you know? And didn't think too much of it, and he says, you look, he says, he's got a hill he's feeding his cows on, he says, you look out over, you'll see it. And well, it wasn't real apparent that first morning. Well, comes to Thursday morning, we went to a wake, the neighbor died. We're coming out from Eau Claire, and there was a color in the snow all the way from, as soon as we got outside Eau Claire in the north edge, it was kind of a real light tan. And the further you got north, the darker it got. He says, see? And I says, yeah, I see. And then, it can't come from the mines, can it? You know, I mean, we're talking 10, 15 miles from the mines. So, Friday morning rolls around, I'm doing chores, and I've got an outside feed bunk, I'm kicking some hay up to my heifers, and I look up at the shed roof. And we'll flip through the pictures here a little bit, there should be a shed roof coming up. And I look at it, it looks brown. Well, it's an old shed, but we painted the roof 2 or 3 years ago, this one right here. And I'm 60 feet away, and I'm looking, that roof is brown, and what the heck's going on? And I walk over there, it's in a Quonset, so it comes down and there's dust on the roof. And I start looking a little more. I went over to Jeff's place and says, hey, you got a good camera, let's go take some pictures. So I got the ladder out, and Jeff went up and took some pictures of the shed roof. That roof was painted 3 years ago. That all came from that one snowstorm. And at the time, I filed a fugitive dust complaint with DNR, and I says, no, I don't know where this came from. I says, if it came, in the Dust Bowl years, they had dust in Chicago from Oklahoma. I said, I don't know if this came from the West or what, you know, but, or did it come from the mines? I said, I really don't know. And that's the way I framed it, because I did at the time. And I says, then Jeff just so happened to be going to the cities to pick somebody at the airport today. He says, when you get over the cities, you start driving back, I says, watch the snow and see when it changes and what it looks like. Well, the snow was dirty over it, it was a different color, it was different, it looked normal, not like around here. As soon as he started coming north out of Eau Claire, he saw it again. And that dust, you could see it on the snow off and on for the next almost 2 weeks, about 12 days for sure, depending on when it snowed and when it melted. If it melted, the moisture would go back down through. If it drifted, it would blow off some of the brown spots, and you get just like a zebra across the whole farm. And I sent a series of emails to Jeff Johnson in Eau Claire, and he since went to work for the industry out in Pennsylvania now. And he emailed back, well, there's dirt and snow down by me, and I emailed back, well, I wouldn't be surprised, we saw it on the north edge of Eau Claire, because he was trying to say, well, it's all over, it's nothing I'm concerned about. He said, well, it could be sand off the roads, it could be dirt roads. I said, Jeff, there's maybe a mile of dirt roads in the town of Howard. It's not sand off the roads, it's even across the whole farm. But to my knowledge, DNR never came out and looked at all to see what we had going on up here. He says, well, if you can't point a finger at it, he says, what can we do? Well, you could come out and document it, look at it, and say, hey, do we have an issue or not? And just because we see dirt doesn't mean it's necessarily a health hazard. It's definitely a nuisance. But, and you're gonna love this one, when we filed a complaint like this, one of his comments in the email was, well, you don't have to worry, you can see it. It's not dangerous.
Oh.
Hello? How do we know that we can't see isn't there? I mean, it's ridiculous, some of the comments you'll get once in a while, okay? And that, I should say, that shed is 2 miles from any mine right there, basically. There's another one, that was not probably quite as good a picture. You can kind of see the stripes in there. That was that Friday morning. And there's the bank along Denny's. I believe that was a major source of a lot of it. But I think it's also cumulative from the number of mines. Now, the interesting part of this is, about the third week of April, we had another little snowstorm. And I've got a picture that woman gave me. She took a picture of her van, and I don't like it because it's portable. But it's got that same dust on the windshield where she went with the wipers, and it's a very thick layer outside the range of the wipers. But, so it's not just necessarily this one event. I think it's kind of common. And Jeff noticed this spring, in spite of all the rain we had in May and June, his pickup was always dusty outside every morning with the dew or moisture that fell. It reminded me back in '88, I remember we were very dry. I'm from Neilsville at that time, it was dry up here too. But your vehicle would get very dirty sitting outside with the dew, which was abnormal. Now it's normal in the wet season up here. So, I think there should be 1 or 2 more yet, dirt pictures.
That was,
Okay, maybe I don't, I got one of the solar panels too under that are dirty, but that's okay, you get the idea from the shed roof, it's the same deal, so. Okay, any other questions, or?
you went through quite a list of mines. How many mines are there operating and being developed and planned? And are all the ones that you told us about in Chippewa, or is that in Barron as well?
A lot of them are in Barron County. There's 11 permitted in Chippewa County, 6 are operating, 1 of them is of no consequence. And there's additional 3 or 4 coming in Chippewa County, along with a couple of already permitted ones that should be operating within a year, year and a half probably, depending on markets and stuff. That's the wild card right now, is what's gonna happen with the oil prices and how that's gonna affect the frac sand industry.
And at Barron?
I can't tell you as much about Barron, I'm not as familiar with it. What I read, your little synopsis came out of that one Rice Lake Chronotype article on the 23rd there, and the 2 mines on the south edge around New Auburn there, I know those a little bit because this spring I expanded my tours to include those 2 mines. And when you get further into Barron County, I know some of the names and stuff, but I don't know much beyond that, so.
Well, Crispin Pierce was at our Sierra Club meeting also a few months ago, and he talked about the particulates in the city of Chippewa Falls. And basically, he said everybody within, I think, a couple of miles of that big processing plant there is endangered. because of the air quality and those fine particulates. It's just really scary. I wonder about what's gonna happen down the road. It's not gonna be a quick thing, it's gonna happen down the road.
No, I firmly believe we get a small village like New Auburn, there's gonna be some very serious health issues. You go forward about 20, 30 years. And then these county governments will be sitting here with a human resources department. There's gonna be young families where parents are sick and they can't take care of the kids and they should be able to. My age or a little younger, little kids, you're gonna have families sitting here with no means to support themselves because their health won't allow it. And where's the state and where these county governments can come up with that money? Or don't they, or doesn't that matter? I mean,
I guess people don't matter.
I mean, can anybody say Libby, Montana? I mean, I was criticized because I made the comparison a couple times early on, but it's very similar set of circumstances. I don't know that we'll have as many sick people as they did all around asbestos mines, but it's the same. Everybody knows what's dangerous. We know what level is
Yeah,
dangerous,
yeah.
but we have no data on what level is in the air. Nobody wants to know. I went to a lacrosse border public health hearing about a year ago in December, I think it was, and they had a state couple. They had Tom Waltz there from DNR and a couple from the State Department of Public Health there, and the question was asked. You know who asked it? We had cards, and I wrote my question in a card. But the question was, first one, do you consider cumulative impacts? Because that wasn't a real well-known thing at the time. And Tom Waltz said, "Well, no, we can't." And then the next question was, what are you doing, or how are you studying this, or are you doing any studies, or are there any plans to? The guy from Public Health, and I'm paraphrasing, this is an exact quote, but he basically said, until somebody shows us that there's a danger or dangerous levels, we have no information to indicate that there is, so we don't feel there's a need to look. I was asked to testify at administrative judge here, in front of an administrative judge down in Trumbull County in the air hearing that MEA has against the state, DNR, and that was one of the, I had my prepared testimony, and then at the end, there's a couple of people who went up to speak again, and the judge asked if there was anybody else, and I went up there and says, I told this little anecdote about the cross-border public health here, and I says, really, if this was the State Department of Public Health is doing for us, I says, why are we paying taxes to support these people? They should be proactive to make sure we're safe, not wait to see there's a problem, and then what? Because if this is all they're gonna do, we don't need them. That could be part of your 300 million you're looking for, in my opinion, because they're not doing anything. All they're doing is giving the public the illusion that they're safe, that somebody's watching. If you don't have them there, then you know there's nobody watching. Just like it is now, nobody watching. So.
There was a time when county and local governments could regulate these sand mines, correct?
Still kin to a point. I don't know how long that's gonna last.
But
Exactly.
the state legislature, for the most part, has pretty much killed that, right?
Not yet. There was 2 attempts by Tom Tiffany and Joan Ballweg to put measures forward. The first one was, I like the first one better than the second one, because the first one everybody knew where you're at. They would have what happened is, your zone towns have authority, and nobody's messed with zoning yet up to this point. It was the unzoned towns that you're talking about, and there's been a couple of legal cases. One of them went to the Supreme Court, was Cooks Valley Threefelhofer versus Cooks Valley, rather, and that decision came down about February 2012. And that was what happened was we had ordinances under our police powers to control sand mines to a degree, and under police powers, we didn't believe at the time you could turn them down, but you could regulate your operations to a degree and try and mitigate some of the nuisances and the health hazards, hopefully. And the landowners up in Cooks Valley, and actually, they went to, I suppose I gotta start from the beginning, this is a long story. We had when the first mine came into town of Howard, we had an ordinance on the books. It was a very poor ordinance. But that mining company applied under our ordinance, and Cooks Valley had basically the same ordinance we did. And those landowners from Cooks Valley went down to the county administrator, it was Bill Reynolds at the time, retired Navy lawyer. So obviously he knows everything, right? And he wrote a letter to the towns of Cooks Valley and Howard saying that he felt our ordinances were illegal because they looked like zoning ordinances to him. And under state law, if you have a zoning ordinance, a town can be self-zoned, but they have to get the ordinance okayed by the county if your county has zoning powers. The county gets zoning powers from the town governments. And that's the situation we're in Chippewa County. We've got 5 zoned towns, and they've asked the county to zone them, basically. So they run the zoning in those, I believe it's 5 towns. Town of Boomer has their own zoning rather than county zoning. Well, when we enacted these, it was underneath the, not the zoning powers, but the police powers of the township under village powers. So it was never approved by the county board. Well, the administrator says we should have been approved by the county board. So the mining company, and actually Bill did us a big favor when he did that, because at that time, the mining company pulled their application from the town of Howard, said, hey, this piece of paper here by the administrator says that you guys aren't legal. Well, his opinion means no more than yours or mine. He's not a judge. And so that allowed us to redo our ordinance, and we then made a very good ordinance, which was later challenged. So at the same time ours was being challenged, the Cooks Valley one got challenged in court because they refused to allow them, basically they said, we're sticking with our ordinance, we don't care what the administrator says. So that one went into circuit court, town lost. They elected to take it to the Supreme Court, or to appellate court, but the appellate court kicked it upstairs to the Supreme Court, so it ended up in the Supreme Court. And while this was all going on, the town of Howard had our new ordinance, which was also challenged on the same basis because we enacted under village powers again. We did not go back to the county for approval. And ours was challenged, and let's see, judge, I won't say which judge, I'm a little foggy there. The Chippewa County judge, one of them struck it down based on 3 criteria. One, it had variable standards. 2, it had a grandfather clause, and the third one, the planning commission was involved. So he says that made it a zoning ordinance, or looked like a zoning ordinance. So the town board comes back, and they've got a choice now. Do you appeal this, or do you just give up, or what? Well, we had Paul Kent as a municipal law attorney out of Madison's, supposed to be one of the top 2 or 3 in the state, and the board, and he sat down, and they decided, well, if these 3 criteria are the problem, we'll eliminate those 3 criteria. They took the planning commission out, they took the grandfather clause out, they took the variable standards out. So at that time, the town felt they had a viable ordinance, a legal ordinance, because they took the problems out that caused it to be a zoning ordinance. So, and that's the ordinance we have today. It's been amended 2 or 3 times with more provisions put in it, but it's never been challenged after that First Amendment where he took those 3 things out. Well, in that frame, and in that time frame, there's 14 months there that Town of Howard and EOG negotiated the mining agreement. The mining agreement gives us property value agreements, which you cannot do under police powers and an ordinance. You could do it under zoning and a CUP perhaps, but not on a police powers ordinance. The reason, and this is where Ron Kosacek is a former public intervener, I don't know if any of you know of him or not, and he takes me to task when I make the following statement is, to my way of thinking, if you've got a good ordinance, you'll never negotiate an agreement. He says, yeah, but then you can't get property value agreements. He says, yeah, Ron, you're right. But generally, these neighbors, these mines, a lot of them are century farms. They've been living there, if not for 100 years, their family's been there for 60, 70, 80 years. They're not going to move because of what the neighbor does to their property. A lot of them, it's farms, it's a business. Where do you pick up and go to? You've got your operation the way you want it, the way you like it. It's the property value agreement, unless you use it, is worthless. And, right, well, but I will admit, in certain circumstances, the property value agreement is very good. We had the gentleman that died next, neighbor that I referred to earlier that died next to Howard Mine. Him and his wife had to move to Chippewa before he died. He had a chronic debilitating illness, and they had to sell that property. They got an offer of, it was under $50,000 for the house. It was just a house, small ranch style house on an acre of land. But it was, the fair market value was $116,000. If they wouldn't have had that fair market value, she would have accepted that $50,000 offer.
One
That's
more
all she
question.
got. Pardon me?
One more question in a nutshell. I'll bet the mining industry has a lot more friends in the state legislature, and how is that affecting the mining going on right now? 30 seconds.
Yeah, they got more friends.
Yeah.
I don't know what's gonna happen. Like I said, Tiffany, the second Tiffany bill then, that muddied the water, to my opinion, would have been a lawyer's heyday. no offense, Dana and Beverly, nobody knew what that said a month after it was written yet. Nobody still had it figured out who it would apply to and who it wouldn't apply to. So it kind of washed out the argument that, well, we can't have this patchwork of regulations because nobody understands what's going on. So.
Sure.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Wow,
Ken.
very good.
We got a couple samples of sand if anybody wants to look.